Hello and welcome to NewsClick. We have here with us Mr. Shankar Raghuraman, the Deputy Editor of the Times of India, to speak on this year's Union Budget. Shankar, welcome to NewsClick again. This year's budget has been called a catch-all budget, trying to appease at one level the so-called quote-unquote reformists who are demanding further liberalization and cuts in subsidy. On the other hand, trying to at least posture that there have been greater allocations in the social sector. Why do you think this impression has been created?
I think the key word there is, as you said, posture. So, if you go through the budget speech, at different points in the speech, it is as if he is addressing different constituencies with each segment of his speech. So, there are parts of the speech which are trying to address this reformist constituency, as you say, where he makes promises about various things, about how financial sector reforms will be carried forward. So many bills are being pushed and so on and so forth, or that the subsidy regime will be completely transformed. So, you have that kind of passages where clearly he is addressing the constituency which says what has happened to the reforms. Then you have other passages where he is talking about how allocation for Bharat Nirman has been raised by 10,000 crore, or that Anganwadi workers will get double the pay that they used to get, and so on, which is clearly addressing the constituency which feels that a lot needs to be done in the social sector. Then there are things like the cut in the surcharge on corporate tax, or allowing FIIs to invest in corporate bonds and so on. So, which is clearly pandering to the interests of business. So, each part of the speech is dealing with very different constituencies. Now, the net result is two things. One, that no clear direction emerges from the whole package, and the other is that a lot of hopes are raised, which on closer examination prove to be not quite valid.
The key issue that's affecting the people today in one sense is raging food inflation. Do you think this budget speech addresses that question at all, and if so, how adequate has it been addressed?
No, in fact, if anything, it did not even address the issue to the extent that people had expected he would. For instance, there was a wide expectation that given the high international prices of oil and the likelihood that with all the conflict in the Arab world, they could go up even further, it was very widely expected that there would be some concessions on import duties on crude oil and petroleum products and so on, so that instead of gaining windfall revenues thanks to an external situation, the finance minister would use the opportunity to somewhat ease domestic oil prices. He did not do that. As for other measures for tackling inflation, all that is being talked about is in the medium to long term, things like building cold storage chains and
augmenting production,
augmenting agricultural productivity,
yeah.
And so none of which is going to happen in a few weeks or a few months. So, in a sense it reflects what the government's position has been over the last few months. Minister after minister, official after official has gone on record to say that there is nothing much we can do to control inflation. Now, that is a position which is reflected in the budget also.
Another issue that emerges when one looks at from an overview perspective is that there is an continued emphasis on fiscal consolidation. Now, this has been an emphasis that has been predominant through various budgets. What's your opinion on this insistence on fiscal consolidation?
Well, one can only put it down to some kind of ideological fundamentalism, because the way they look at it, their argument is that fiscal rectitude is required because if the fiscal deficit balloons, the government's borrowings balloon, then according to them two things happen. One is that you are crowding out private investment by squeezing the supply of money available to private sector, and B, that you are fueling inflation. Now, if you actually look at the empirical evidence on the ground, neither of these two seems to hold. I mean, you have had periods of high fiscal deficit with very low inflation, and you've had periods when they have had very tight control on the fiscal situation, but inflation has been running very high. I mean, even if you look at just the last, say, 2.5 years, from the time of the commodity price spikes of 2008 onwards, you've had near double digit inflation throughout, at a time when monetary and fiscal policy has
Been conservative. Yeah.
no, it has gone through a cycle. There was a point at which they were easing money supply to try and fuel growth, because of they thought the global crisis would affect growth. And there was another point at which they were squeezing in order to, in both, I mean, it has made no difference to inflation. So, one can only explain this as some kind of ideological fundamentalism.
Getting to the specifics of the budget, let's talk about revenue mobilization. There has been a critique of this budget in the sense that it is quite iniquitous in the way it mobilizes resources in the form of taxes by shifting the burden on resource mobilization through indirect taxes, which affects all, and reducing direct taxes. Do you agree with this critique?
Well, by the finance minister's own admission, I mean, in his budget speech, he says that my proposals on the direct taxes front will lead to a revenue loss of 11,500 crore. And then he says that, however, my proposals on indirect taxes will lead to a revenue gain of 11,300 crores. So, they are more or less balanced out. So, I mean, that's the answer is there for you. It's quite clear that most of the revenue mobilization is happening through indirect taxes, not direct.
How would this affect the inflationary spiral?
Well, to the extent that indirect taxes work by pass-ons from, I mean, for example, if you raise the excise duty on something, then obviously, while in theory it is the manufacturer who pays the excise duty, he is clearly not going to pay it out of his own pocket. He is going to pass it on to the ultimate consumer, right? And the same is true of service tax, the same is true of customs duty. So, all indirect taxes ultimately are a levy on the ultimate consumer. And unlike direct taxes, where you can target who is paying the direct tax, in an indirect tax, you are charging everybody. Anybody who buys a bar of soap, whether it is Mr. Mukesh Ambani or the poor rickshaw puller, is paying the same amount of tax on that bar of soap.
Speaking on tax GDP ratio, if you notice the trend so far, in 2007-2008 rather, it was around 12%, and now in the current fiscal year it has come down to literally 10%. So there is, I mean, the tax GDP ratio has also come down over time, right?
Yeah, it has primarily for two reasons. One is that because you have this approach which says that customs duty rates must be brought down to what they call Asian levels. So, you have, I mean, if you look at it, what's been happening over the last 20 years since the reforms began, customs duty rates have gone down and down and down all the time, and that is one consistent cut. The other is also this theory which says that on the direct taxes front, you must moderate tax rates, because if the tax rates are high, then people will not pay. So, the more moderate you make it, the more people will pay. Well, the fact of the matter is that at the end of all this moderation, there are still only 30 million people who are income tax payers in this country. Right? Now, if you are two major chunks of taxation, if you are constantly committed to reducing them, then obviously your tax GDP ratio is going to suffer, irrespective of how much you claim that moderating rates will actually lead to an increase in revenues.
Speaking of tax rates and resource mobilization, there is another issue which has taken which has become a strong political issue, is the whole issue of getting back black money and preventing money laundering. Well, the budget speech does not talk about any concrete measures, right? Which would actually address this problem.
Yeah. Well, again, the speech has one entire section devoted to this issue of black money, but if you go through it, what it really says is, some of it is, I mean, it does not talk about what any further steps being taken. It really talks about steps already taken, which are in the nature of international agreements, under the aegis of the G20 and so on and so forth, and which really do not address the issue from the Indian point of view in any detail. And there is nothing in the budget to suggest that much is likely to happen in this on this front, at least in the immediate future.
Right. Let's get to the specifics of fiscal expenditure. The finance minister has announced that there will be massive cuts in the subsidy for fertilizer, food and fuel. He has counterbalanced it by saying that a direct cash transfer program will be introduced in the next financial year, right? What's your opinion on this direct cash transfer program, which has actually seemed to have captured the public imagination of late?
Yeah. Let's take this in two parts. One is the principle of the direct cash transfer. The logic that is being offered in favor of this is that there are very large leakages in our current system of reaching subsidies to the intended people. As a result, a lot of the subsidy is going to people who do not deserve to get them, whether it is in food or kerosene or fertilizers. So, therefore, the idea is, instead of giving people food grain through the PDS, where the PDS shop owner may show you as having bought the grain, but actually be siphoning it off into the open market, why do not we just give cash in the hands of the person whom we want to benefit? And this has been around for a long time, there is nothing new about this theory, but it has gained steam now because they feel that thanks to the UID program, it is easier to ensure that the cash goes to the right person. Now, there are two problems with this. One is that, for example, if you take LPG, cooking gas, right, where right now it is a universal system. Everybody who buys cooking gas gets a subsidy on the cooking gas. So, how does a cash transfer help you target? You do not want to target anybody, you want to give it to everybody, right. So, and actually it is a much more efficient system to simply subsidize the product rather than to set up a whole infrastructure to transfer money to individual households, where you do not know how much money should be transferred to whom. There is a whole complicated an apparatus that has to come up to just deal with this kind of question. So, therefore, it cannot also save you money. So, why is there the belief that it will save you money? The only conclusion one can draw is that that belief has to rest on the assumption that you will actually cut down on the number of beneficiaries. Otherwise, how are you saving money by moving LPG, let us say, from the current system to a cash transfer system? So, I think that is where the hidden agenda of this whole move is, that ultimately you want to reduce the quantum of subsidies, and this is one way of doing that.
Speaking of agriculture now, critics again say that priority for agriculture in budgets over time has been lowered. This despite the fact that agriculture continues to remain the sector where the highest employment is provided in the country.
See, again the phenomenon is as old as the reforms themselves, and of late, to be fair to them, they have at least started making noises about agriculture, which I mean partly of course that is because the huge number of farmer suicides that keep happening year after year, it is impossible now to pretend there is nothing wrong there. Plus the fact that you had food inflation running at double digits for most of the last 2.5 years also makes it impossible for them to pretend that agriculture is doing fine. So, to that extent they are compelled to make some noises about it. But if you look at what is actually being done, their entire system of dealing with the agricultural problem, the assumption seems to be that if you can pump in more credit into the agricultural system, then it will deal with the problem. The focus of all their attention has been trying to pump in more and more credit into the system, and without asking themselves the question, who is this credit really going to? This category of farmers who are able to access institutional lending from rural banks or rural branches of normal bank, who is this category? Is it really the poor and marginal farmer who constitutes the bulk of the peasantry? Are they the people who are able to access this? So, they are not dealing with
The specificities of Indian.
Yeah, they're dealing with it as if it's a credit crunch.
Right, right.
You know, and that is why the problem continues to exist. I mean, something as simple as irrigation, right? I mean, why is it that we still have such a small part of our cultivated area under irrigation, and why has nothing been done about that for the last 20 years? Those are the questions they should really be dealing with.
So it should entail a more dedicated approach on rural expenditure in agriculture,
Yeah.
rather than simply looking at it as a credit
Yeah, I
transfer.
mean, it's ridiculous to allocate sums like 300 crores to a scheme and say in 3 years we will be self-sufficient in pulses, whereas the reality is that in pulses our per capita availability today is lower than it was at independence. You know, and then you think you can get rid of that problem in 3 years.
Right. So give us a last word on this budget.
My last word would be that it is a budget offers the Aam Aadmi homilies, but offers industry, the well-to-do and so on, very concrete freebies. You know, and that's unfortunately been the trend over several budgets.
Thank you, Shankar. Thank you so much. Thank you for your insight on this.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.